Hello. Welcome to our next chapter, that is your IND AS 24, which talks about related party disclosures. Not a very important chapter, but we'll cover it quickly so you don't have to waste a lot of time. So basically, every entity will have to give disclosures for related party transaction. If there is any transaction where you're transacting with another related party, in such a case, this has to be made in the individual financial statements of the entity. That means the entity that is getting into this transaction, as well as consolidated and separate financial statements of parent. That means entity you have to definitely, plus also has to be disclosed in the parents separate as well as consolidated transactions. So we will first understand who are related parties. So first is your person or relative. Any person or relative becomes a relative party when, so it will be a related party to a reporting entity if that person has, so either, okay, so this is a or condition. So if that person has control or joint control over the entity, so this is your first, it either has control or joint control over the entity. Second is it either has significant influence, and third is KMP of entity or parent. It is either the KMP, key managerial person of the entity, or the parent of the entity. If either of these are satisfied, then that person or the relative becomes a related party for the entity. Okay, now what is KMP? Let's understand the definition of KMP. KMP is all directors, whether they are executive or non-executive, does not matter. All directors are your KMP. So this example is your CEO, CFO, COO, etc. Okay, so this is your chief operating officer, chief financial officer, and chief executive officer. Now definition of relative. What is your relative? So say for example, this is me. I am a related person to the entity. So my relatives will also be considered as a related party to the entity. So who are my relatives? First of all would be my children. It would be my spouse. That is my who I am married to. Next is my brothers and sisters and my father and mother. So up father and mother, down your kids, spouse and your brother sister. Now what is important is it also includes dependents. So wherever I put plus, that means whoever are dependent on me also become my relative. Whoever are dependent on my spouse also become my relative. So basically, me, my parents, my children, my spouse and her dependents, my brother, sisters, and my dependents, all of these are considered as relatives. So these are your personal relations. Second comes your entity relations. So any members of the same group, say for example, there is one holding company with two subsidiaries S1 and S2. And another case, if there is one holding company with two subsidiaries S1 and S2, and both S1 and S2 have another subsidiary. So S1 subsidiary is S3 and S2 subsidiary is S4. In such a case, H, S1, S2, S3 and S4 are all related to each other. For S1, all others are related parties. For S2, all other are related parties. For S3, S4, S2, S1, H, all are related parties. So basically, entire everybody in this group is a related party. Second is subsidiary of venture or associate. Any subsidiary of a venture or associate. Why we call the same group holders, holding company and subsidiary are called under the same group. Next is subsidiary of venture or associate. Subsidiary of a venture or associate. So say for example, you are the holding company. Now this holding company has an associate. This holding company has an associate A1 and A1 has a subsidiary S1. So the question is, who are the related parties for H? So for H, the related parties are A1 and S1. Okay, I'll not circle it so that you can still read it. So for H, your related parties become A1 and S1. That means both of these are related parties. For H, A1 and S1 are both related parties. Okay, second, if I am a holding company and I have a associate company and the associate company has a joint venture. In such a case, does the joint venture also become the related party for the holding company? Answer is no. For the holding company, only the associate is a related party. So what you have to understand is, if it is a subsidiary, it is okay, that will be considered as a related party. But in case if it is a joint venture after an associate, then that is not your related party. I hope this example is very, very clear. Third, say for example, you are a holding company. Then you have two subsidiaries, S1 and S2. Now S1 has another associate, A1. A1 has a subsidiary, and this subsidiary has another associate. Okay. So in such a case, who all are related parties? So you have to understand, we want to understand from the point of view from S2, that is this, from the point of view of S2, who all are related parties. So from the point of S2, of course, H is a related party. Of course, we understand that members of the same group are also related parties. So S1 also becomes the related party. Now associate also comes under the same year. So therefore S1, A1 are all related parties. Okay, S3 will also, because this is a subsidiary of an associate. So subsidiary of an associate, we consider it as an associate only. So therefore S3 is also a related party. But now what about the associate of this subsidiary? So associate of this subsidiary is not. So therefore this A2 is not a related party. This J1 is also not a related party. Okay. Coming to your fourth example. So holding company. S1, S2. S1 has A1 and A1 has J1. So in this case, for S2, we are seeing this from point of view of S2, who all are related parties. Okay. So for S2, who all are related parties, of course, your H will be related party, your S1 will be related party, no doubt. Your subsidiaries associate also will be a related party, but you've seen whenever it comes to joint venture, we will not be considering it as a related party. Therefore, J1 is not a related party. Okay, coming to joint venture or associate. So a holding company has a associate. Of course, it is related to your holding. So it is a related party to your holding. If you're holding as a joint venture, this will also direct relations will be a direct relations of joint venture will be a related party. Okay, next, holding has a subsidiary, and subsidiary has a associate. In this case, of course, your both A1 will be related to your H, and A1 will also be related party to S1. Next, same thing, just last is joint venture. This also will be a related party. So if you do only one thing, it will be related. Next is joint ventures of the same group. Say for example, you have a holding company and you have J1 and J2. So the question is, are J1 and J2 related to each other? We already know that J1 will be related to H and J2 will be related to H, but we want to understand that are J1 and J2 related to each other? Are both the joint ventures also related parties for each other? Answer is yes, J1 and J2 are also related to each other. So J1 and J2 are also related to each other. Acha, what if, sir, what if I add another level? What if I add another level, that holding subsidiary, and then another joint venture? Will it still be? Yes. So subsidiaries, this will become same group. Your H, S1 and S2, this will become same group. So therefore, joint ventures of the same group will also be a related party. Next is joint ventures and associate of the same group. So that is your holding. This we did right now. Over here we did joint ventures of the same group. Now we are doing joint, when one is joint venture and the second is associate of the same group. So of course we know both of these are related to each other. That is, J1 is related to H and A1 is related to H. But is J1 and A1 related to each other? Answer is yes, they are related to each other. So J1, A1 are also related parties. Achha sir, what if I add another level, that is H, and I add one S1, 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 S2, both subsidiaries, and subsidiaries one has a joint venture, another subsidiary has an associate. In such a case, will J1 and A1 be related to each other? Answer is yes, J1 and A1 will also be related to each other because they belong to the same group. Next is control, joint control, significant influence or key managerial person. Now say for example, there is a person Mr. A. If there is a person Mr. A who has either joint control or control over entity 1. If there is a person Mr. A who has control or joint control over entity 1, and there is another entity 2 where Mr. A or relative, another entity which is entity 2 where Mr. A or relative has joint control or significant influence or is a KMP. So under, if he is joint control or control at one entity, and in the other he is joint control, significance, influence or KMP, either of these four in entity 2, then are entity 1 and 2 related to each other? Answer is yes, entity 1 and 2 are related to each other. Okay, now I'll ask you a simple question. Now say for example, if Mr. A has significant influence in both the entities, that is entity 1 and entity 2, if Mr. A has significant influence, or if he is a KMP in both of these entities, will entity 1 and entity 2 be related to each other? I want you to answer in the comment section. Will entity 1 and entity 2 be related to each other if Mr. A has significant influence in both the entities? Okay, next. Any post-employment benefit plan of the entity. Say, for example, some entities have their own provident fund. So, any recognized provident fund of entity, yes, that also becomes a related party, because these are basically separate entities that the entity creates. Next is any entity providing KMP services to the reporting entity. If any entity is providing key managerial services to the reporting entity, does this entity and the reporting entity become related parties? Answer is yes. This entity and reporting entity both will become your related parties. Just we are finishing this chapter. Yeah. So next is your non-related parties. Who are your non-related parties? So basically co-associates. So if there is a holding company with two associates, that is A1 and A2, in such a case A1 and A2 are not related to each other. Any co-venturer, that is holding company with two venturers V1 and V2, V1 and V2 will not be related to each other. Any SI or KMP, this I've already asked you a question. So basically, if a person has significant influence in one place and significant influence in other place, entity 1 and entity 2 will not be related to each other. So I've answered the question that I asked you earlier. Next is your common KMP. That means if one person, if say for example me, I am a KMP or a director in entity 1 and I'm also a KMP or director in entity 2, in such a case, does this make entity 1 and entity 2 related to each other? Answer is no. Entity 1 and entity 2 do not become related to each other. Any major customer or supplier, if there is any supplier who provides me 90% of my requirement, they'll ask you a question like this: if this person provides you 90% of your raw material requirement and you've done a transaction with this, is this a related party transaction? Answer is no. Any major customer or supplier is not your related party, and any providers of finance, any bank or any such cases, they will not be your related parties. Coming to your last part, that is disclosure. So disclosure is first, if there is control, then you have to disclose the relationship irrespective of whether transaction was done or not. So basically, what do you have to disclose related between related party? Do I have to disclose, say for example I'm Dheer and there is another related party, say example entity A. So now does entity A have to disclose that Dheer is a related party? Do they have to disclose or not is the question. So if I control that entity, then disclosure has to be done. Whether or not that entity has done any transaction with me, irrespective of that, entity will have to disclose it. However, if there is any joint control, significant influence, or if I am the KMP of that entity, in such a case, entity will disclose only and only if the transaction was done during the year. Only and only if there is any transaction done during the year. Only in such a case will the disclosure be made, because I do not have control over the entity. I have joint control, significant influence, or I am the KMP of that entity. Next, your related party relationship has to be considered if it existed at any time during the year. So say for example, if I was a related party during the year, say for example for 3 months, and a transaction occurred in the remaining 9 months when I was not a related party to the entity. In such a case, does the disclosure have to be made? Answer is yes. I will become a related party to the entity even if I was a related party for 1 day. I will be considered as a related party for the entire year. And last is disclosure has to be given irrespective of whether the transaction is at arm's length price or not. That means if the transaction was at fair market value or not does not matter. Disclosure as per these conditions has to be given irrespective of whatever the price the transaction has happened at. And with this, we are done with this chapter, and I will see you in the next one, that is your interim financial report.